How's it going, everyone? It's Reuben here from Speakeasy with this edition of TLDR. And on this episode, we're going to look at Bill Gates' new book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. So when it comes to climate change, there are two numbers you should know. One is 51 billion. That's how many tons of greenhouse gases are added to the atmosphere each year. The other is 0. And that's kind of what we need to aim for to avoid a climate disaster. So why 0? Well, Earth is warming, and we have a pretty good sense that it's due to human activity. The impact is already pretty bad. I mean, we have floods and droughts, and it's looking like things will get worse. In fact, kind of by the middle of the century, climate change could be as deadly as COVID-19. Gates uses an interesting analogy in the book where he compares the climate to a bathtub and the greenhouse gases that are filling it to water. And this idea is that even if we were to slow that flow down to a trickle, eventually the tub's going to overflow. So what we really need to do is kind of open the drain, let out all that water, or equivalently, turn off the tap. So what are the hurdles? Well, the problem is very complex. It touches on almost every aspect of human activity. We have some tools at our disposal, but not everything we need. Also, the clock is ticking, and this sort of rapid, drastic change on a global level is very difficult. Also, we need to lower what Gates calls green premiums, which is pretty much how much more expensive is a clean product than its dirty equivalent. So who are the climate change culprits? In other words, where do our emissions come from? Well, in the book, Gates broadly breaks this down into 5 categories. There's making things, plugging in, growing things, getting around, and keeping cool and warm. So what are some of the innovations that could get us to 0? Well, there are clean energy sources like nuclear, wind, biofuels. We also need clean methods for storing it, like a decarbonized power grid, clean batteries, alternative fuels. There are also things like carbon capture, which is pretty much a process where waste CO2 is captured and stored so it doesn't get deposited in the atmosphere. We also have things like plant-based and cultured meat. But innovation isn't just a matter of tech and devices. We also need new government policies. So those government policies will encourage more R&D, kind of spark new companies, and maybe get new products to market quicker. So what is our path to 0? Well, according to Gates, we have to electrify every process possible. For those that we can't, we have to use carbon capture. And for cars, for example, we'll have to use clean alternative fuels. We also have to make use of this trifecta of markets, technology, and policy. Those will be our way to drive down green premiums. We also kind of have to force a speedy transition. Remember, the clock is kind of ticking. So things like maybe making things that emit carbon more expensive and making things that are carbon-free cheaper is one approach. Lastly, we have to make our voices heard with our votes and our checkbooks. Especially with our checkbooks, remember this whole idea of supply and demand. If there's a demand for clean products, then there will be a supply. Finally, some of my favorite quotes. If a genie offered me one wish, a single breakthrough in just one activity that drives climate change, I'd pick making electricity. There's also, there is nothing wrong with using more energy, as long as it's carbon-free. And finally, it's hard to think of a better response to a miserable 2020 than spending the next 10 years dedicating ourselves to this ambitious goal. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for Speakeasy's next edition of TLDR.